I bought the cheapest 3000 watt inverter available on eBay. Will it power a shop vac? Will it power an air compressor? How about 12 amp circular saw? How about a 15 gallon air compressor? Now there's a few things that I'm not going to be testing on this inverter. I won't be testing the under voltage lockout voltage. I won't be testing the over voltage lockout voltage. I'm not going to be testing short circuit protection. These inverters almost always list that and they never have it. When you short circuit something like this, you're well outside the safe operating area of the output FETs and you often blow them up. So they're not really protected. We will try overloading it though. I will be testing the efficiency of it, seeing if it can run certain things, seeing if it can really run this thing without overheating and exploding. We'll be taking a look at the waveform to see how good the waveform is. I'm not necessarily going to be testing this at all conditions of input voltage and output current. I'm not going to be testing EMI ratings or any sort of distortion type of stuff. We're just going to see how this thing works. Now the first thing we need to test this inverter are some good batteries, good 48 volt battery bank. So here I am in my disgustingly messy room that I am very ashamed of. It has lots of stuff in it. Are this whole stack of batteries that I really need to rearrange into a 48 volt battery bank. That's the intention, but anyway, I'm just going to use these top four on top. They're already connected in series with some zero gauge cable. And I'm also going to be connecting up this La Marche, I don't know, battery charger. It's I think it's like a 1500 watt 48 volt battery charger. So I'm going to be hooking that up here too, just as a little bit of a boost so that we don't drain these batteries down too far. For cabling, I got this cable with it. I think that's mildly inadequate. So what I'm going to use instead to make sure that we have adequate cabling is this. That's some good 4/0 cable. So nobody can blame me and tell me that I'm not using sufficient cabling. So I thought better of it, and I am going to use this 150 amp resettable circuit breaker. So let's hook this thing up for the first time. I'm using zero gauge cable now. I decided against the 4/0. Doesn't fit on these lugs very well. So let's hook this up for the first time and see if it explodes. I hate that. I usually charge it through a resistor for that reason, but I didn't this time. And it did damage my battery terminal, in case you were wondering. I really shouldn't do that. Normally I charge it through a resistor. It doesn't really matter what ohms it is, as long as it's not zero. And that way you don't get that nasty spark and all the damage on your terminals. Let's turn it on and see if it explodes. No explode, so that's a good start. Let's see what kind of current this thing's drawing under no load. I was told 0.6 amps by the seller, so we'll see if that is correct or not. About 0.3 amps, 0.25 I guess, under no load. That's pretty darn good. I'm very happy with that. It's only taking 10 watts or so of idle power. That's not bad at all, and it's not horribly loud either. One of the things I like about this old meter is that it has a oscilloscope mode, so I'm just going to use that instead of a real oscilloscope. I think it'll be good enough for this. So we're on voltage. Let's see what kind of volts this thing is outputting right now. 120 volts. Okay. Let's see what the waveform looks like. And it looks like a very standard modified sine waveform. Nothing unusual there. This thing has trouble triggering on modified sine, so you have to excuse it as it jumps around, but it looks like a very normal modified sine waveform. So let's plug something into it and see how it does. I have these halogen lights over here. I think they're probably 250 watt bulbs each, I'm not sure. Let's plug this in, see how that works. Alright, I have my kilowatt P3 meter hooked up. Let's plug in these lights and see what happens. The light's turned on, and it is still 120 volts. Claims it's drawing 500 watts. Looks like they were 250 watt bulbs. 4.16 amps at 120 volts. Now, I'm going to be testing efficiency of this, so I do want to see if this cheap household unit is accurate, and I don't have any good calibrated scientific equipment to do that, so what I'm going to use is my current clamp and this multimeter, and I'm just going to make sure that the two numbers match up. This meter is saying 4.14 amps. So I have this cord plugged in. This is the cord that's powering the lights right now, and I cut it apart. So I'm just going to put this on my amperage setting, clamp it around the wire, and see if it about matches up with that current. 4.28 versus 4.16. That's a few percent off. That's pretty reasonable for the grade of equipment I have. I know that this meter isn't perfectly accurate either. So let's check the voltage. This is a true RMS multimeter. 122.3. This is 121.1, so we're off by less than 1% on that one. So given that a clamp meter is typically less accurate than something that measures it directly like this, I think that these results match within a few percent, and that's good enough for this test. And the way I'm going to measure efficiency of this is extremely simple. I'm just going to take my input voltage and my input amperage as measured by this DC multimeter and this AC clamp meter, and I'm going to use the output wattage from my P3 kilowatt meter and calculate the efficiency based on that. Volt times amps equals watts, watts in, watts out, efficiency. Done. I also have my battery charger hooked up now, so I think it's about 800 watts actually. So now we're not going to be replenishing these batteries as we do our testing, at least not as quickly. So let's first check this light. It is running right now, so let's see what we have for an efficiency on that. So we're going to start with the DC measurement right at the inverter here. It's on DC volts, and it's important to measure this right at the inverter, not at the batteries, because we don't want to measure the loss in the cables. We're at 57.2 volts, and we have 10.2 amps. 490. Stick it in the calculator, and from there we get efficiency. 83.4%. Extremely disappointing. What did I say? 83.9%? So 84%. To continue this efficiency testing, I'm just going to use a couple of electric heaters, 1500 watt electric heaters with multiple heat settings. It looks like up to, this is 1840 watts, but it looks like the efficiency peaks at around 1500 watts, a little over 90%, and then it starts dropping slowly again. So this isn't atypical of an inverter in this price point. I'd like to see in the low 90s. A very good inverter will be maybe 96% peak, very cheap inverter about 80-85% peak. Power jack inverters that I've seen, those are down in the 70s, absolutely abysmal, garbage, junk. But this one isn't all that unrespectable, so I can't say what their 12 volt or 24 volt models will be. But in terms of this 48 volt model, it's okay. Now I've had this electric heater running on high and these lights over here, and it's been maybe 10 minutes that it's been running that way. So let's check temperatures. The air coming out is still cool. There's really no heat up here. There's a little bit of heat down here. It's hardly warm, really. Very hardly warm. So maybe I'll let this run for a while longer and see how hot it gets. But in the meantime, I'm going to grab another electric heater and see what kind of efficiency I can get at 3000 watts. So this is pretty interesting in testing the overload capabilities of this. I did grab another electric heater. It's down here on the floor. One is on, one is off right now. They're both set to 1500 watts. So I still have those halogen lights plugged in behind over here, and you can see that the voltage is 120 volts. Let me zoom in on that. So there's our output voltage. If I take this second electric heater here and I just turn it on high real quick, you can see the voltage hardly changes, but after about half a second it overloads. Last time I did this, it reset on its own and restarted. This time it doesn't seem to be doing that, but a manual reset does work. So it can't really do 3500 watts like it said for 20 seconds. I'm not overly surprised. So let's see what it actually can do. Heater's on low. That's going to be about 2500 watts. Now it's on medium. And the voltage is extremely stable. I'm pretty impressed with that, really. That's pretty good. And then on high, and then it's going to trip. Yep, almost immediately. There we go. That time it reset on its own. I don't know what the deal is. So here I have all of these heaters connected up. This is basically maxing out the inverter after this over current limits. So let's see what kind of power we're pulling here. We have 490 watts from the lights. I can't put them all through here because this thing will trip, so now I'm just going to swap the outlets and add them together. 490 for the lights. And we have 2250 for the heaters. And there's the final data point I'm going to be taking on efficiency, 2,740 watts. So it looks like it peaks at, we'll just say 90%, call it a 90% efficient inverter. And even at its absolute max load, it's still almost 90%, so that's not too bad. I would definitely consider that a pass. Now this thing's been running for a few minutes at this 2,800 watt load. Let's see what it's doing in terms of temperature. Okay, here's that input block, and you can feel that there's some heat coming through now. Not a lot, but a little bit. On the other side, almost nothing. Output air is almost cold. This is an old 1980s dehumidifier, and while it only takes maybe 600 watts or something while it's running, it is an excellent appliance to test how an inverter handles inductive surge. And let me demonstrate why. I have the extension cord over here plugged into the wall. I have a very solid 125 volts here at this house. Dehumidifier is plugged in here, and I have my current clamp wrapped around one of the leads. So I will turn this on. It starts up, and it looks like it takes 6 amps or so. The power factor isn't going to be 1, so it's probably taking around 600 watts to run. We're going to let this run just here for a few seconds, and then I'm going to shut it off and turn it right back on. Now this has a piston compressor. Piston's going up and down in there, and when I shut it off, that piston's under full pressure, and it takes a while for the pressure to equalize. So when I turn it back on without letting that pressure equalize, it's going to be stuck in what's called a locked rotor condition, and we're going to be dumping all of that power directly into the compressor, and we'll see how many amps this thing takes as a surge to start in that condition. Set that to max, turn it off, and turn this back on. I just popped my breaker. Let me unplug the battery charger and try this again. Alright, even though that battery charger isn't taking a huge amount of power, it's still enough to trip my 20 amp breaker, so let's try this again. 36 amps. So this thing takes something like a 4,000 watt startup surge, maybe 3,000 watts. We'll just assume that the inverter voltage will sag a little bit, and I've always said that this takes 3,000 to 3,000 watts as a startup surge. This is just a demonstration of that. So let's see how the inverter powers this. This is an inductive device. The instructions say not to power it. As a little bit of a correction here, this thing's been running maybe 20 minutes now on this 2,700 watt load. Seems to be working just fine. I had mentioned that this was the side with the input FETs. That was wrong. This is the side with the output FETs, where it's bolted directly to the case, and they are getting quite noticeably warm now. Almost uncomfortably warm to the touch, which isn't anything horrible, but it's something to note. This side over here is staying pretty cool. The top of the clamshell is staying cool. Air coming out now is noticeably warm. So these output FETs are indeed getting a little bit warm now. Alright, I have that dehumidifier hooked up to here with that wicked startup surge, and I still have my 500 watts of halogen lights running. Let's see what happens when I plug this in, see if this can start that dehumidifier. Yeah, starts it up with no problem at all. I didn't even notice the lights flicker, and that's pretty impressive. Usually the lights flicker when you do stuff like that. So let's see if this thing protects itself against a severe overload. I'm going to turn that dehumidifier off and then turn it right back on. We'll see what happens. There you go. It protected itself just fine, and it started the dehumidifier just fine. So that has me curious. I have a 1500 watt heater and the halogen lights hooked up to this one. That's 2,000 watts. This dehumidifier takes maybe 600 watts to run. That basically maxes out this inverter. So the only thing this inverter now has to start it is the surge capability. Let's see if this inverter can start that dehumidifier with all this other load already connected, somewhere around 2,000 watts. So here we go. Started right up, no problem. Light didn't flicker one bit. And now we come to the what can it power segment. We're going to go through all these different power tools here and see which ones it can or can't power and which ones it can power two at a time. The inverter is in the basement, so we won't be seeing or hearing it, but I do have it run up to this heavy-duty extension cord, so we're going to see what it can do out here in the garage. First up, this 12 amp shop vac. Will it power a shop vac? And it looks like it does. Next up, a 13 amp Piston cast iron air compressor. It looks small, but it does fully max out the 15 amp circuit. Will it power an air compressor? Yes. How about 12 amp circular saw? 13 amps actually. Yes. How about a 15-gallon air compressor? Yes, powers that too. So let's do all these same things again, but with an electric heater connected. Alright, we have 1500 watts of electric heater connected. Let's see if it can power each of these with the heater running. This is 1500 watts, or half of the capacity of that inverter, now gone. Vacuum, no problem. Air compressor struggled to start a little bit. It might be because of the long extension cords, but it did start. We'll try this 13 amp circular saw next. No issue there. How about our big air compressor? No issue there. That's pretty impressive. Alright, we're going to be doing the same thing, but this time we're going to use this electric saw as our second load. Now this has a pretty brutal startup surge for a very brief period of time. Whenever you use something like this, even in your house, you notice the lights flicker. They take a lot of startup power. So we're going to run through and see if this saw will start up while each of these other loads is running. No problem there. The air compressor will be a little tougher. No problem there. How about this air compressor? Again, no problem. That's pretty impressive. So you can run an air compressor and your circular saw at the same time. Now granted, I didn't put this under load, but I think you'd be fine. So, got two air compressors. I doubt it. Let's give it a try. Let's start this guy up first. He has a little bit more trouble starting up. How about that? Even all by itself, it didn't start up this time. Alright, I'll try this other one. Wow, that's impressive. This little teeny inverter that costs $200 can power two air compressors at the same time, both of which max out a 15 amp circuit. I'm impressed. Yet I'm not sure we did enough to try to break it yet, so let's break it. Air compressor. Well, It started it up, that's pretty impressive, but then it overloaded and shut down. It seems like it has about a half second surge, which is fine. And this time it did not auto restart itself. So I'll have to go back downstairs and retrip it. And we're back up and running. Now before I finish up, there's one more thing that I want to check. I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm fairly impressed with this little guy, so I'm actually going to. I'm going to see if this is a phase corrected modified sine wave inverter or not. I don't have the perfect test set up here, but right now my battery voltage is 57 volts. I have the charger on it, and there is absolutely no load on the inverter, and you can see the waveform here. Again, this doesn't trigger on it very well, so it jumps all over, but you can kind of see the waveform here. It's a pretty good modified sine wave waveform. So what I'm going to do now is max this thing out. I'm going to turn on 2 electric heaters to about 2500 watts, and we'll see how much this waveform changes. I'm also going to turn off the charger. And now our battery voltage is going to be much lower, and we can see that the waveform has substantially degraded. It's much closer to a square wave now. I'm going to turn the other heater on high. It's probably going to trip the inverter, but we'll see. And we can see there that it's almost a square wave now. So this inverter, if it is phase corrected, they did a very poor job of it. I didn't really expect that at this price point, and that's pretty typical of any modified sine wave inverter you buy. If you max it out under low battery voltage, you get basically a square wave. And as the battery voltage sags more and more, this will turn more and more into a square wave. Just something interesting that I wanted to note. So after all that, would I recommend the 3000 watt Pugu power inverter for only $200 on eBay? Yeah, I would. And I'm very surprised to say that. I didn't expect much out of this, and I got much more than I expected. For what you're getting, that's a pretty good deal. Now, this is the 48 volt model. If you buy the 12 volt model, I'm not sure how that's going to perform in comparison. It's possible that this 48 volt version is very good and the 12 is very bad. I don't know, but this performed very well. I'm quite pleased with it. It's a very good value line 2000 watt inverter. The build quality is acceptable. The quality control inside is reasonable for this price point, and its performance was very good. This actually was one of the better performing 3000 watt modified sine wave inverters I've ever used. So because of that, yeah, I think I would have to recommend this. The fan runs all the time, so it does make noise, but when it's running, it's fairly quiet. The efficiency in it is pretty decent. It's not awesome, but it's not terrible. It's pretty decent. It runs very heavy loads. It doesn't overheat when run for a long period of time. It has very good voltage regulation. The waveform quality isn't all that good, but it is modified sine, so usually you don't run inductive loads off of it, though I've tried it, and you can. So yeah, 3000 watt Pugu inverter. No idea where you can buy it. I got mine on eBay, but I'd recommend it. Thanks for watching.